The cold doesn't care about bravery. December 22nd, 1944, 11:30 in the morning, 20 degrees below 0 dot. Private First Class Leo Palma lies pressed into frozen Belgian earth, watching death walk toward him through the snow. 4 figures, gray uniforms, white flags snapping in the wind. His fingers won't close around his rifle anymore. To numb, to cold, ice forms in his throat with every breath. He's been here 2 days without sleep, without food, without hope. The Germans approaching him look like they stepped out of a warm room. Long coats, polished boots. The kind of confidence that comes from winning. Palmer knows what they want. They want him to surrender. What he doesn't know yet is that in the next 17 minutes, his commanding general will give an answer so simple, so unexpected, so perfectly American, that it will change the course of the war. 1 word, 4 letters. And the Germans won't know what hit them 6 days earlier. The world caught fire. December 16th, the Ardennes forest. Dawn breaks over the snow, and with it comes the thunder of 200,000 German soldiers smashing through. American lines like a fist through paper. This is Hitler's last roll of the dice. His final gamble, Operation Whacked, AM Rhine, Watch on the Rhine. The code name sounds defensive, protective. It's anything but. This is a blitz, the old kind, the kind that crushed Poland, that brought France to its knees. 3 entire armies, 1,000 tanks. Boys of 16 fighting beside men of 50. Every operational gun Hitler can scrape together. Every veteran division pulled from the collapsing Eastern Front. The Führer's bet is simple. Split the Allied armies. Recapture Antwerp. Force the Americans and British to negotiate peace. Then turn every weapon east toward the Soviets. It's madness. It's also working. The German buildup was a masterpiece of deception. Units moved only at night. Radio silence so complete that Allied intelligence heard nothing but static. Artillery pieces dragged by horses to avoid engine noise. 3 armies assembled in total darkness opposite the weakest stretch of American line. When the storm breaks, it catches everyone off guard. The Americans stationed in the Ardennes are either green, troops getting their first taste of combat, or exhausted divisions sent there to rest. The 106th Infantry has been on the line 5 days. The 28th is still bleeding from the hell of Hirchen forest. They're not ready. The German assault hits like a freight train. Villages vanish in flame. Entire regiments are overrun before they can radio for help. Roads clog with retreating soldiers, wounded men stumbling through snow, officers shouting contradictory orders into the chaos. Within hours, a bulge forms in the Allied line, a deep, dangerous salient pushing west, pushing toward Antwerp, toward victory, and right in the path of that bulge sits a small Belgian market town most Americans have never heard of. Bastogne. 7 roads meet there. 7 arteries feeding the German offensive. Control those roads and the panzers can race west unimpeded. Lose them and the entire attack grinds to a halt. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower sees it immediately. Bastogne is the key. Hold it and the German offensive strangles. Lose it and the war in the west might be lost with it. He picks up a phone. The call goes to the 101st Airborne Division. They're supposed to be resting. The Screaming Eagles, the 101st. Paratroopers who jumped into Normandy on D-Day, who fought through the nightmare of Operation Market Garden in Holland. 3 months of continuous combat, heavy casualties. Many of the men are on leave in Paris drinking wine, trying to forget what they've seen. Their division commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, is in Washington attending staff meetings. His assistant is in England. That leaves the artillery commander in charge. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, 46 years old, West Point class of 1918. A man who's spent his entire career around howitzers and fire direction charts. He's not supposed to be commanding paratroopers in the biggest battle on the Western Front, but sometimes history doesn't care what you're supposed to do. The order comes. Down December 17th, move to Bastogne now. 107 miles through freezing rain and darkness. The men pile into open trucks, packed so tight they can barely breathe. No room to sit, standing for hours. Wind cutting through summer uniforms because nobody expected this. Nobody packed for winter. The journey is hell. Trucks skid off icy roads. Engines die in the cold. Men jump out to relieve themselves and have to run to catch up. They pass retreating units heading the opposite direction. Defeated soldiers warning them to turn back, saying the Germans have tigers, panthers, entire divisions. The paratroopers ignore them. They arrive in Bastogne late December 18th. Cold, exhausted, underdressed. They're told this will be quick. A few days. Stop the Germans. Hand over to fresh troops. Return to camp. No one tells them they're about to be surrounded by December 20th. Every road out of Bastogne is cut. German forces close like a fist. The 101st and attached units, about 14,000 Americans, are trapped. Outside the perimeter, 5 German divisions press in. Tanks, artillery, everything inside. The defenders have determination. That's about all they have. The cold becomes its own enemy. Minus 28 Celsius on the worst nights. Rifle bolts freeze solid. Machine guns seize up. Medics have to warm morphine syringes in their mouths before they can inject the wounded. Blood plasma freezes before it can save lives. Men pee on their rifles, too. Unfreeze the mechanisms, they learn to keep one. Round-chambered at all times, because working the bolt might be impossible. Frostbite claims more casualties than bullets. Men remove their boots and find toes black with gangrene. Feet swell so badly, they have to cut the leather open. The wounded lie on church pews because there are no stretchers. On classroom floors, in basements filled with terrified Belgian civilians, old women, children, babies crying in the darkness, while artillery screams overhead, German 88s punch through stone walls like they're paper. Nebelwerfers, the screaming rocket scum, in salvos of 6. Their distinctive howl sends men diving for cover before the explosions even arrive. 150mm shells turn entire blocks into rubble. The medieval buildings of Bastogne, standing for centuries, come apart under high explosives. The cathedral takes direct hits, but refuses to fall. The town square becomes a moonscape of craters, and through it all, the Americans hold barely. Ammunition runs low. Some artillery batteries are down to 10 rounds per gun. Infantry units have enough bullets for one more serious fight, maybe 2 if they're careful. Food is almost gone. Men survive on cold rations and melted snow. Hot meals are a memory from another life. Medical supplies vanish. Surgeons operate without anesthetic. Bandages are washed in dirty water and reused. The aid stations overflow with men who are dying from wounds that could have been saved. General McAuliffe knows all this. He drives the perimeter every day in his jeep. Artillery bursting around him, he walks the foxholes, talks to the men, sees the exhaustion carved into 18-year-old faces, sees sergeants who haven't slept in 4 days still giving orders, sees lieutenants barely old enough to vote commanding companies because all the captains are dead. He knows they can't hold much longer, not without relief, not without a miracle. December 22nd, 11:30 a.m.4, Germans walk toward Private Palmer's position carrying white flags. Palmer doesn't know what to do. Enemy soldiers approaching under truce wasn't covered in training. Staff Sergeant Carl Dickinson takes charge, calls them over. The Germans consent to being blindfolded. They've even brought their own white cloth strips that look torn from bedsheets. A medic who speaks German joins them. Together, they lead the blindfolded officers through a winding route toward command. The Germans can't see where they're going, but they can hear American voices. Tired but determined, weapons being cleaned, sergeants giving orders. Soldiers joking in foxholes. No panic, no defeat. The message travels up the chain of command, from foxhole to company, company to battalion, battalion to regiment. Finally, it reaches McAuliffe at 11:45. He's in the basement of Heinz Barracks. Cold stone walls, the smell of mildew and cigarette smoke. Maps covered with red and blue symbols showing enemy positions closing like a noose. Radio operators hunched over crackling sets. Staff officers working by kerosene lamps because the electricity died 2 days ago. Lieutenant Colonel Ned Moore, the acting chief of staff, wakes him. The Germans have sent people forward to take our surrender. McAuliffe sits up. Surrender. He blinks in the dim light. Nuts! Moore hands him the typed message. 2 sheets, English and German. The diacritical marks on the German version entered by hand, suggesting it was typed on an English typewriter. Mick, Auliffe, reads it. The message is formal, almost polite. It explains that American forces in Bastogne are completely encircled by strong German armored units, that more German forces have crossed rivers, taken towns, cut off all escape routes, that there is only one possibility to save the encircled troops from total annihilation: honorable surrender. 2 hours to decide. If the proposal is rejected, 1 German artillery corps and 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions stand, ready to annihilate everyone. The order to fire will be given immediately after the 2-hour deadline. All serious civilian losses will be the Americans. Fault signed, the German commander. McAuliffe reads it, crumples it into a ball, throws it in the wastebasket. Ooh! Nuts. Then he walks out to congratulate some units on the western perimeter who eliminated a German roadblock that morning. As far as he's concerned, the German demand doesn't deserve a response, but protocol requires something. The Germans came under a white flag with a formal written ultimatum. Military custom demands an answer. When McAuliffe returns an hour later, his staff is debating what to say. Someone suggests a formal military response, outlining tactical reasons why surrender isn't an option. Someone else suggests explaining that Patton's 4th Armored Division is approaching from the south. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard, the division operations officer, has a different idea. McAuliffe is standing there wondering aloud what to tell them. Kennard speaks up. "What you said initially would be hard to beat." Sir McAuliffe looks at him. "What do you mean?" "You said nuts." The staff erupts in agreement. Laughter nods all around. McAuliffe grabs a piece of paper. He writes, to the German commander, "Nuts." The American commander, he hands it to a clerk. "Have it typed up?" Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th Glider Infantry, delivers the response personally. He takes Private First Class Ernest Premetz with him as interpreter. They return to where the German officers wait. Still blindfolded in the woods, Harper puts the typed message directly into Major Wagner's hand. Lieutenant Hank, the junior German officer, asks if the reply is written or verbal. "It's written," Harper says. "Is it affirmative or negative?" The reply is decidedly not affirmative. Harper's voice is cold, hard. "If you continue this foolish attack, your losses will be tremendous," Hank translates for Wagner. The major nods slowly. They're driven by a roundabout route back to their entry point. The blindfolds come off. The Germans open the message, read it, look up, confused. What does this mean? They genuinely don't understand the American slang. Harper and Premetz discuss how to explain it. Harper suggests one thing. Premetz straightens up, faces the Germans, and says in German, "Du kannst zum Teufel gehen." You can go to hell. Wagner's face darkens. Hank translates Harper's additional comment about killing every German who tries to break into the city. "We will kill many Americans," Hank replies stiffly. "This is war. We'll kill many Germans," Harper shoots back. Then Harper says something that will be remembered. "On your way, bud, and good luck to you." After translation, the Germans salute, turn, start walking back through the snow toward their lines. Harper calls after them, anger in his voice. "If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just go back and tell your commanding officer to go to hell." As Major Wagner passes Palmer's foxhole, he throws down his blindfold. Palmer catches it. He'll later use it to clean his rifle, then throw it away. He has no idea he's holding a piece of history. The Germans return at 2 p.m. They drive to the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment headquarters, then to Panzer Lehr Division headquarters. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of the 47th Panzer Corps, happens to be there when Wagner and Henk present the American reply. Luttwitz can't believe it. He'd been confident the Americans would surrender. He'd already prepared his victory march into Bastogne, rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd accept their weapons. Instead, he gets one word he doesn't understand. General Fritz Berline of Panzer. Lehr suggests starting the promised artillery barrage. Luttwitz interrupts him. The heavy artillery isn't there anymore. It was moved forward past Bastogne to support the drive toward the Meuse River. The 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions mentioned in the ultimatum. Fiction. Luttwitz had been bluffing, trying to intimidate the Americans into surrendering without a fight. The bluff was called "He Has Nothing." The promised massive artillery barrage never materializes. Word spreads through the American lines like electricity through wire. Soldiers who'd been on the edge of despair suddenly find energy they didn't know they had. If the general thinks the situation is nuts, not desperate, then maybe they can hold. If he can tell the Germans to go to hell when surrounded then they can keep fighting. The story grows with each telling. Some say McAuliffe tore up the surrender demand. Others claim he used much stronger language than nuts. But everyone understands the core message. No surrender, not now, not ever, years later. Vincent Vicari, McAuliffe's personal aide, will confirm that nuts was exactly what the general said. General Mac was the only general I ever knew who didn't use profane language, Vicari recalls. Nuts was just part of his vocabulary. It captures McAuliffe. Perfectly direct, unpretentious, absolutely determined. The effect on German morale is equally profound. German soldiers had been told the Americans were finished, that surrender was inevitable. The offensive depended on speed, on crushing resistance quickly. Moving on. Every day Bastogne holds is another day the timetable slips, another day for Allied reinforcements to arrive, another day closer to the weather clearing and Allied aircraft returning. When word spreads that the Americans rejected surrender with a single incomprehensible word. German soldiers begin to wonder what kind of enemy they're facing. Experienced tank commanders who fought across Russia and France know when an enemy is ready to break. Every indicator points to surrender, surrounded, outnumbered, no air support, limited supplies, terrible weather. But they didn't surrender. They responded with a word that makes no tactical sense, even when translated. Doubt is deadly. The side that believes it will win has an enormous advantage over the side that begins to question. McAuliffe's nuts plants doubt in German minds while strengthening American resolve. That psychological shift is worth more than a regiment of reinforcements. Field Marshal Hasso von Mann, commander of 5th Panzer Army, is furious when he learns of the response. He'd counted on Bastogne falling by December 22nd. His panzers were supposed to be across the Meuse by Christmas instead. They're stuck besieging a single town, December 20-3rd. The weather breaks for the first time in a week. Sun pierces the clouds. Within hours, C-47 transport planes appear over Bastogne. Supply drops, parachutes blossoming like flowers. Against blue sky, medical supplies, ammunition, food, winter, clothing. 241 planes drop 144 tons of supplies. Not enough to solve every problem, but enough to keep fighting. More importantly, clear weather means Allied fighter bombers return. P-47 Thunderbolts roar over German positions. Bombs, rockets, strafing runs. Anything that moves becomes a target. On Christmas Eve, McAuliffe types a message to his troops. He sits in the cold basement, typing by candlelight. Outside, German Luftwaffe bombers make their nightly run. The building shakes. Plaster dust drifts from the ceiling. Mick, AULIFFE, types steadily. He tells them about the German surrender demand, about his reply. Then he writes, "What's merry about all this, you ask? We're fighting. It's cold. We aren't home. All true. But what has the proud Eagle Division accomplished with its worthy comrades? Just this. We have stopped cold everything thrown at us from the north, east, south, and west. We have identifications from 4 German panzer divisions to German infantry divisions and 1 German parachute division. These units, spearheading the last desperate German lunge, were headed straight west for key points when the Eagle Division was hurriedly ordered to stem the advance. We are giving our country and our loved ones at home a worthy Christmas present. And being privileged to take part in this gallant feat of arms, we are truly making for ourselves a Merry Christmas." The message is mimeographed, distributed to every unit. Company commanders read it to men in foxholes, in basements, in ruins of buildings. Some soldiers weep. Others cheer. All understand their general is with them. That same night, German forces launched their heaviest attack yet. Panzer Lehr strikes from the west, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division from the southeast, the 26th Volksgrenadier from the northeast, tanks and infantry, supported by artillery, trying to break the perimeter at multiple points. At Champs, Team Cherry of the 10th Armored faces 18 German tanks and a regiment of infantry. The Americans have 4 tank destroyers and 2 companies of paratroopers. The German tanks advance in darkness, engines roaring, tracks clanking on frozen ground. The tank destroyers wait until 300 yards, then open fire. The night explodes. Muzzle flashes, explosions, German tanks burst into flames. Infantry scatter. The attack is repulsed, but at a cost. Team Cherry loses half its strength. Near Marvy, the 2nd Battalion, 327th Glider Infantry faces a battalion of German paratroopers. Elite Fallschirmjäger who jumped into Crete. Fought in Italy? Know their business. The Germans attack just after midnight, moving through woods like ghosts. They get within grenade range before being detected. The fight is hand-to-hand, bayonets and knives in darkness. Private First Class Thomas Gallagher kills 3 Germans with his entrenching tool when his rifle jams. The Glider. Infantry holds barely. The most serious threat comes at Flamaire. German tanks and infantry find a gap in American lines. They pour through, heading straight for Bastogne. If they break through, the entire defense collapses. Mick Auliffe scrapes together his last reserve, a provisional company of cooks, clerks, walking wounded. Led by Major William de Sabri, wounded at Noville but refusing evacuation. With bandages covering one eye, de Sabri leads this unlikely force into battle. They meet the Germans in woods. Outside Bastogne, the cooks and clerks fight like veterans. They've heard about nuts. They know what it means. No surrender. No retreat. They hold the Germans for 3 critical hours until reinforcements arrive. When dawn comes, 42 German bodies lie in the snow. The provisional company lost 18 men, but they saved. Bastogne, December 20-6th, lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division break through. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, personally leads the attack that opens a corridor to the surrounded town. Captain William Dwight, commanding the 1st Tanks to enter Bastogne, finds McAuliffe and asks, "How are you, General?" McAuliffe replies, "Gee, I'm mighty glad to see you. The siege is broken. Bastogne has held." General George Patton arrives soon after. On December 30th, he awards McAuliffe the Distinguished Service Cross. But McAuliffe's modesty is evident. He insists the real heroes are the paratroopers who held the perimeter, the medics who treated wounded without supplies, the artillerymen who made every shell count. His response meant nothing without their willingness to keep fighting. The story of nuts immediately captures American imagination. War correspondents flood into newspapers across America run headlines about the nuts. Reply, radio broadcasters tell and retell the story. Editorial writers praise McAuliffe's defiance as quintessentially American. Within days, McAuliffe goes from unknown brigadier general to national hero. Mail pours in from across the country. Mothers thanking him for inspiring their sons. School children sending drawings. One company offers to send 10,000 pounds of nuts to Bastogne, but the influence extends far beyond publicity. During the Korean War, when American forces are surrounded at Chosin Reservoir, Marines joke about giving the Chinese the Bastogne treatment during Vietnam. Besieged fire bases reference. McAuliffe, when refusing enemy surrender, demands. The word becomes shorthand for defiance against overwhelming odds. Mick Auliffe is promoted to Major General January 3, 1945. Given command of the 103rd Infantry Division, he leads them through final battles in Germany. After the war, he commands 7th Army, then U.S. Army Europe, retires in 1956 as a full general, but for the rest of his life, wherever he goes, he's the nuts general. The town of Bastogne never forgets. The main square is renamed Place General McAuliffe, a monument erected with the story inscribed in multiple languages. Every December, ceremonies commemorate the siege. A Sherman tank stands in the square, bearing battle damage from the fighting, a permanent reminder. The veterans formed the Association of the Battered Bastards of Bastogne. Taking pride in a nickname German propaganda gave them as an insult. They hold reunions every year, growing older, fewer each time, but never forgetting. Staff Sergeant Joseph Rogan of the 502nd Parachute Infantry was checking his men's positions when word spread about McAuliffe's response. His men were exhausted, freezing, almost out of ammunition. He thought they were finished. Then he heard about nuts. It was like someone turned on a light in a dark room, he said later. Private William Cephacus of the 327th Glider Infantry was wounded, lying in a church being used as an aid station when a medic told him about the surrender demand and McAuliffe's response. The church was St. Peter's. Stained glass windows blown out, snow drifting through gaps, wounded men in rows on stone floors, some moaning, others silent, the smell of blood and gangrene and human waste. Despite shrapnel in his leg, Cephacus smiled. "That's our general," he thought. "We're surrounded, bleeding, freezing, but we're telling them to go to hell." Technical Sergeant Donald Burgett of the 506th wrote that when he heard about nuts, the fear didn't go away, but it became manageable. If the commanding general could joke in this situation, then it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Burgett had been in combat since Normandy. Jumped into Holland, he knew what desperate looked like. This was desperate. But nuts changed the equation, turned desperation into defiance. Private First Class Vincent Speranza of the 501st was manning a machine gun position when word came down. It was so cold he had to chip ice off his barrel every few minutes, his hands so numb he could barely feel the trigger. German tanks were probing their lines, looking for weak spots. Then he heard about nuts. Speranza laughed for the first time in days. Years later, at age 94, he would still get emotional talking about that moment, about how one word from a general he'd never met gave him strength to keep fighting. German military historians studied Bastogne extensively after the war. General Heinz Coquet, who commanded the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, wrote that the nuts response demoralized his men more than any artillery barrage. It showed an enemy not thinking about surrender, even when logic dictated they should. It suggested the Americans knew something the Germans didn't. The single word created doubt. And doubt in combat is deadly. The Battle of the Bulge continued another month after Bastogne was relieved. The Germans fought stubbornly, but the initiative had shifted. By late January 1945, the Germans were back where they started. Having suffered over 100,000 casualties, the Western Front would never recover. 4 months later, Germany surrendered. Anthony McAuliffe died, August 10th, age 77. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His tombstone bears his name, rank, and dates of service. It doesn't mention nuts. It doesn't need to dot Vincent Vicari. His loyal aide lived until December 5th, 2011, age 92. To the end, he defended the accuracy of the nuts. Story against skeptics who thought it must have been something more profane. Military's worldwide study West Point, Sandhurst, St. Cyr, staff colleges around the world. Officers analyze tactical decisions, positioning of forces, allocation of scarce resources, but they always include the story of nuts, because it demonstrates something that can't be taught in a classroom: the importance of moral courage, of maintaining spirit under extreme stress, of understanding that sometimes victory comes not from superior tactics or equipment, but from simply refusing to quit. Young officers learn that units with high morale can overcome odds of 3 to even 5-2-1. As Bastogne proved, they learned that leadership in crisis isn't about managing resources. It's about managing fear, doubt, and despair. Mick, Auliffe, managed all three with a single word. The story has been told in countless books, documentaries, films. The 1949 movie Battleground brought Bastogne to American theaters. The scene where word spreads about nuts became one of the most famous moments in war cinema. Band of Brothers, the 2001 HBO series, devoted 2 episodes to showing how McAuliffe's defiance filtered down to individual foxholes. But perhaps the most powerful testament comes not from Hollywood, it comes from the veterans themselves. At reunions of the 101st Airborne Division Association, old men would gather, their numbers dwindling each year. They'd talk about friends long dead, about moments of terror and moments of triumph, and always, inevitably, someone would raise a glass and say, "Nuts," and everyone would laugh, remembering that December day when their general told the Germans to go to hell. First, Sergeant Leonard Funk of the 502nd, who would win the Medal of Honor in January 45, said Bastogne taught him what Americans were capable of when pushed to the limit. We found out we could take anything the Germans could, dish out and give it back harder. Nuts was just our way of saying, bring it on. Major Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Who would become famous through Band of Brothers, wrote in his memoirs that McAuliffe's response was worth a division of reinforcements. It gave us something to fight for beyond survival. It gave us pride. We were the guys who said nuts to the that meant something. Even German veterans acknowledged the psychological impact in post-war interviews. General Major Heinz Kokett admitted, "We could not understand an enemy who would joke when surrounded. It suggested they knew something we did not. It made us hesitant, uncertain. In war, uncertainty is fatal." The influence extended to other conflicts. Other armies during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, when the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem was surrounded, defenders explicitly referenced Bastogne during Korea. When 1st Marine Division was surrounded at Marine Commander General Oliver Smith said, "Retreat? Hell. We're not retreating. We're just advancing in a different direction." The spirit of nuts lived on in Vietnam. When Fire Support Base Ripcord was surrounded by North Vietnamese forces in 1970, the American commander was asked if he'd consider withdrawal. He replied, "McAuliffe didn't withdraw from Bastogne, and we're not withdrawing from Ripcord." They held for 23 days before finally being evacuated. The tradition continued in Iraq and Afghanistan, where surrounded outposts would paint nuts on their walls, a connection across generations to that December day in Belgium. Today, 79 years later, the story endures. Bastogne has become a place of pilgrimage. Veterans return, now in their 90s or represented by children and grandchildren. They walk the perimeter where young men held the line, stand in the square where McAuliffe's statue looks out over the town he saved. They visit the War Museum where McAuliffe's uniform is displayed, along with the typewriter that produced the famous message, the Bastogne War Museum. Opened in 2014 for the 70th anniversary, uses modern technology to recreate the siege. Visitors experience the cold, hear the artillery, feel the desperation, but the climactic moment is always the same, the German surrender demand, and McAuliffe's response nuts visitors from around the world. Speaking dozens of languages, all understand that moment. It transcends language, culture, time. It speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit. The refusal to surrender when surrender seems logical, Belgian citizens haven't forgotten either. Every December, they hold ceremonies honoring the American defenders. School children learn about the siege, about McAuliffe, about nuts. They tend graves at Henry American Cemetery, where many defenders are buried. They ensure the sacrifice is remembered. The story told, the tactical lessons of Bastogne are taught at military academies. Interior lines, economy of force, combined arms defense. But the deeper lesson is about human nature. When people believe in their cause, when they trust their leaders, when they refuse to accept defeat, they can achieve the impossible. McAuliffe understood this. His nuts wasn't bravado. It was recognition that his soldiers would rather die fighting than live surrendering. In that basement in Bastogne, presented with an ultimatum that logic said he should consider, McAuliffe gave the perfect response. Not a sophisticated word, not a diplomatic word, not a military word, just an American word that every American soldier understood, that left every German soldier confused and demoralized. It was instinctive, authentic, perfect. It came from a general who'd walked the lines, seen the suffering, measured the courage of his men, and knew they would not quit. The final statistics tell only part of the story. The 101st Airborne Divisions. Casualties from December 19th, 44 to January 6th, 45, 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, 516 missing, other units defending. Bastogne suffered proportionally, but they held. They denied the Germans the crossroads they desperately needed, bought time for Patton to arrive, for weather to clear, for the tide to turn. But beyond numbers, beyond tactics, beyond strategy, Bastogne represents something larger. It represents the moment when ordinary people pushed beyond endurance find within themselves extraordinary courage. It represents the power of leadership to transform despair into determination. Represents the truth that wars are won, not just with weapons and logistics, but with will and spirit. One word: didn't win the war. But one word at the right moment helped ensure the war. Would be one word showed that American citizen, soldiers far from home would fight with the same determination. As any professional military in history, one word demonstrated that overwhelming force could be met with overwhelming will. One word proved that in warfare, moral factors can overcome material. Disadvantages? That word was nuts. Simple, clear, defiant, perfect. It came from the gut of a general who knew his men, knew their capabilities, knew they'd rather die than surrender. It expressed in 4 letters what volumes of military doctrine try to explain about fighting spirit, unit cohesion, combat leadership. It reminded us that sometimes, in the darkest moments when logic says surrender and survival, instinct says quit. The human spirit can say something else entirely. It can say nuts, the Germans demanded. Surrender, McAuliffe said. Nuts, the Americans held. The Germans failed. The war was won. History was made. All because one general at one moment found exactly the right word to express American defiance, not through careful deliberation, not through strategic calculation, but through simple human instinct that recognized surrender wasn't an option. In 4 letters, he captured the essence of the American warrior spirit in one word. He defined defiance for all time. The echo carries forward through Korea, through Vietnam, through every frozen outpost and surrounded position where American soldiers have faced impossible odds. When commanders brief their troops before deployment, they tell the story of Bastogne, not for the tactics, not for the terrain analysis, but for what it teaches about the human will to resist. At the infantry officer basic course at Fort Moore, Georgia, young lieutenants study the siege. They walk through the timeline, analyze the German offensive, calculate ammunition, expenditures, and casualty rates. Then they discuss nuts, and suddenly the classroom gets quiet, because they understand they're not just learning history. They're learning what they might have to become, what they might have to find within themselves when everything says they should quit. At the Airborne School at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, paratroopers about to make their first jump here, about the 101st at Bastogne, about men who jumped into Normandy, who fought through Holland, who were supposed to be resting when they got thrown into the Bulge. Men who wore the screaming eagle patch with pride, who said nuts. To an enemy army, the instructors don't need to explain the lesson. The young soldiers get it. Being a paratrooper isn't about the jump, it's about what comes after. When you're surrounded, outnumbered, cold and scared, that's when you find out who you are. In Bastogne today, the town square hums with everyday life cafes, shops, tourists taking photos, Belgian families going about their business, but the ghosts are there. In the cobblestones where American paratroopers dug foxholes, in the cathedral walls, still scarred by shrapnel, in the basement where McAuliffe typed his Christmas message by candlelight, every December the town transforms. Reenactors arrive wearing period uniforms. American jeeps and German vehicles line the streets. The sound of blank ammunition echoes through the square as living. Historians recreate the fighting, but it's not a celebration, it's a remembering. Belgian citizens stand alongside American veterans fewer each year and remember the price of freedom. Remember the young men who died in the snow. Remember the civilians who sheltered in cellars while their world came apart above them. Remember one word that changed everything at the Martison Memorial just outside town. A massive star-shaped monument rises against the sky. On its walls, the names of American units that fought in the Ardennes. Inside, a crypt with an altar and mosaic depicting the Madonna and Child. Visitors from around the world stand there. In silence, many have never heard of Bastogne before they arrive. Their tour in Europe. Following World War II history, they stop because their guidebook mentions it. Then they learn the story, and something shifts. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who visits. They're standing in the War Museum, or walking the perimeter, or reading the plaques in the square. And they imagine themselves there December 1944, 20 below. 0, surrounded, outnumbered, running. Out of everything, German officers walking toward them with a surrender demand. What would they do? What would they say? It's an uncomfortable question. Most people would rather not know the answer. But that's what makes the story powerful. McAuliffe and his men didn't have the luxury of wondering. They had to choose. In real time, with real consequences, they chose defiance. And in choosing, they showed the rest of us what's possible. The last surviving veterans of Bastogne are leaving us now, one by one. They're taking their final jump, rejoining the friends they left behind in Belgian snow. At funerals across America, aging paratroopers gather to honor fallen comrades. The rifle volleys, the folded flag, taps played on a distant bugle, and always, at some point, someone mentions Bastogne. Someone tells the story of nuts, because it defines them. Even the veterans who weren't there. Even the ones who served in other wars. They understand what it represents. The refusal to quit when quitting makes sense. The commitment to each other when commitment is all you have left. The willingness to tell the enemy yourself that surrender isn't an option. In the archives at the Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, researchers can examine the original documents from Bastogne, the German surrender demand, typed on 2 sheets. The diacritical marks entered by hand, McAuliffe's reply, even more stark, even more powerful for its brevity. Nuts. Historians have analyzed that message from every angle. Linguists have debated its effectiveness. Psychologists have examined its impact on morale, but in the end, it defies analysis because it wasn't crafted. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't focus grouped or ward-ash-gemmed. It was human. A man pushed to the limit. Asked to surrender, responding from the gut, and somehow that authenticity, that raw, unfiltered American defiance communicated more than any carefully worded response could have. There are leadership lessons here that can't be taught from a manual. McAuliffe didn't inspire his men by giving them pep talks or false promises. He inspired them by being real, by walking their perimeter, by seeing their suffering, by refusing to pretend things weren't desperate. When the German surrender demand arrived, he could have hidden it from his troops, could have worried about morale, could have crafted a response designed to project confidence they didn't feel. Instead, he told them the truth. The Germans want us to surrender. Here's what I told them. Nuts. And in that transparency, that absolute honesty, he gave them something more valuable than optimism. He gave them authenticity. The men knew their general understood exactly how bad things were. And if he could still say nuts to the Germans, then the situation, while desperate, wasn't hopeless. That's leadership, not in a classroom, not in a doctrine, not in a PowerPoint presentation, in a frozen basement in Belgium. Typing a one-word message that would echo through history, the German officers who delivered the surrender demand survived the war. Lieutenant Helmuth Henke, who spoke perfect English and translated for his superiors, returned to civilian life. He rarely talked about Bastogne. When pressed, he would say only that the American response had been unexpected. That might be the understatement of the war, Major Wagner. The senior German officer who carried the ultimatum was more forthcoming in post-war interviews. He admitted they'd been confident the Americans would surrender. The situation was objectively hopeless. Surrounded, outnumbered, no supplies, no air support. By every military calculation, they should have surrendered, he said. We gave them an honorable way out. Instead, they gave us a word we didn't understand and a determination we couldn't break. He paused in that interview. The recording still exists in German military archives. Then he added, "That was the moment I knew we would lose the war. Not because of their tanks or their aircraft, but because of their spirit. You cannot defeat an enemy who refuses to accept defeat." There's a photograph that survived from Bastogne. It's not famous like the flag raising at Iwo Jima or the kiss in Times Square, but it captures something essential. It shows a group of paratroopers on the perimeter. Christmas Day, 1944. You can see their breath in the frozen air. Their faces are gaunt, hollow-eyed from exhaustion and hunger. Their uniforms are filthy, patched, inadequate for the cold, but they're smiling, not big grins, not posed for the camera. Just the quiet smiles of men who know they're winning, even though it looks like they're losing, because they'd heard about nuts, because they knew their general had their back. Because surrender wasn't on the table, that photograph hangs in the 101st Airborne Division Museum at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Thousands of soldiers see it every year. Most don't know the names of the men in the picture. Most couldn't tell you what day it was taken or which unit they belonged to, but they understand what those smiles mean. The influence of nuts extends into unexpected places in corporate boardrooms. Executives facing hostile takeovers have invoked Bastogne. We're giving them the McAuliffe treatment. In sports, coaches facing elimination have referenced it. Teams backed into corners. Season on the line. Remember best. Remember nuts. It's become cultural shorthand, sometimes appropriately, sometimes not, because there's a danger in reducing that moment to a catchphrase. In turning sacrifice into a slogan, the men at Bastogne weren't playing a game. They weren't negotiating a business deal. They were facing annihilation, real death, real cold, real terror. When we say nuts today, we should remember what it cost: the paratroopers who died in the snow, the medics who froze while treating the wounded, the Belgian civilians who lost their homes, their families, their futures. The word is powerful because of what it represented, but it only meant something because of what those men were willing to endure to back it. There's a final detail worth noting. After the war, someone asked McAuliffe if he'd known his response would become famous. If he'd understood the historical significance of that moment, he looked puzzled. "I was just answering a question," he said. "They asked if we'd surrender. The answer was no. I said it the way I'd say anything else." That's the most remarkable part. He didn't know he was making history. Didn't know that word would be remembered 80 years later. Didn't know it would inspire soldiers in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. He was just doing his job, leading his men, making a decision, refusing to quit. The heroism wasn't in the word. It was in the choice behind the word, the commitment to stand and fight when every rational calculation said to surrender. That's what we celebrate when we remember nuts, not clever wordplay, not a pithy quote, but the moment when one man, representing 14,000 others, looked at impossible odds and said, "No. Simply, clearly." Finally, no. The guns fell silent over Bastogne. In January 1945, the snow melted. The civilians emerged from their cellars. The wounded were evacuated. The dead were buried. The town began to rebuild, but the memory remained in the minds of the men who fought there, in the hearts of the families who lost sons and fathers and brothers, in the stones of the cathedral and the cobbles of the square, and in one word that still echoes across the decades: nuts. For letters, one syllable, infinite defiance. It reminds us that freedom is defended not just with weapons, but with will, not just with strategy, but with spirit, not just with logic, but with the simple refusal to give up when giving up seems the only rational choice that December day in Belgium, surrounded and outnumbered. Anthony McAuliffe and the defenders of Bastogne showed the world what Americans are made of: not superior technology, not overwhelming force, not brilliant strategy, but determination, courage, the stubborn, refusal to accept defeat. That's why we remember. That's why the story endures. That's why 79 years later, in a world that's forgotten so much, we still remember one word from one general on one frozen December morning. Because in that word, in that moment, in that choice, we see the best of what we can be when faced with the worst of what we must endure. The Germans demanded surrender. McAuliffe said, "Nuts." And history was never the same.